With the global popularity of Korean wave, the Hallyu, it has now become quite common to find non-Koreans who are passionate about Korean culture. But our globalist today, Suzanna Oh, was a champion of Korean culture before BTS, before Squid Game, before it was cool to be Korean. She came to Korea as a Peace Corps volunteer in the 1980s, but she ended up playing an essential role in the global popularity of various types of Korean culture, especially the Korean traditional percussion performance, Samulnori. My old friend Suzanna joins me today to talk about this journey and how she is still breaking barriers in promoting Korean culture. So welcome to the Globalists, Suzanna.
Oh, it's so great to see you. And thank you so much for the invitation. You don't look any different than when we first met about 30 years ago.
Me too, too. You do actually look exactly the same. And I guess in some ways it's because you're still so passionate about everything that you do. Because I hear that you have recently celebrated 45 years in Korea. So tell me about this 45 years of journey in Korea. What has kept you here for so long?
Looking back on it, it's been extraordinary. Of course, at the time, I didn't realize this. I came in 1980 as a Peace Corps volunteer. I worked in a rural health clinic as a tuberculosis control volunteer.
Oh, my.
If you can imagine at that time, tuberculosis, Hansen's disease, mother-child health, these were also big public health issues. I enjoyed my time very, very much in the countryside. That was a very, very different Korea than what we see today.
Of course, yeah.
And after I finished my Peace Corps service, I decided I wanted to stay in Korea. I wanted to study more about this country. And at the same time, I had the experience of seeing a performance by Samulnori. And Samulnori is a traditional percussion in Samul. Samul refers to the play of 4 different instruments, the hourglass drum, the barrel drum, and 2 types of gongs, large gong and small gong. And I went to see a performance, and when I saw this performance, I still remember my emotions of that day. And in my heart, something drastically changed, and I immediately wanted to learn how to play these instruments. And so after much searching, I figured out where the studio was that the musicians were rehearsing in. And, you know, as a 21-year-old American, I went in there and said, teach me your instruments. And they said, no, because number one, I couldn't speak Korean. Number two, traditional music runs in families.
Yes.
So father teaches son or daughter, or else you become what is known as 문하생, which means actually to live with your teacher.
Yeah.
And so I tried for years actually to learn how to play the instruments. And finally, the leader of the group kind of gave up and said, well, you can come and try and practice on your own. And when I went to their studio, of course, I noticed that there were a lot of messages from abroad. And I said, oh, Sensei, when are you going to answer this? And he finally said, well, maybe you should answer that. And that's how I started off being this percussion group's tour manager. Very
overseas,
amateur.
Overseas tour manager.
Overseas tour manager, very amateur. I had never done that before. My teachers taught me everything how to do that. And I managed a traditional Korean percussion group for Korean men and myself. We toured the world for about 15 years.
Oh,
and that was when Korea was opening itself up to the world. We had the Asian Games in 1986. And then you remember the Olympics. And we met.
1988.
Yes, and we met then. And it was an incredible experience. I got to travel the world, introduce Korean music to people throughout the world.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, that was an exciting time, really, to be a part of Korea.
Absolutely, absolutely. Korea, I think it became a country that was very much more outward oriented. And with the Olympics, I'm sure you recall, it's not just athletic events, but also there's a cultural part of the Olympics. And so for Koreans, it became a time of reflection. what do we show the world about our culture that they don't know about? And of course, there's music, there's dance, there's actual historical artifacts like palaces and things like that. And so I trace the Olympics as the beginning of this major cultural renaissance within Korea.
True.
Because it really changed after that.
It raised Koreans' culture to a new level. I think is probably the level that led to Korea's cultural boom of today.
Yes.
But after Samulnori was a exciting part, but then you went on and the 대성그룹 energy?
Yes, I had a kind of varied career. I worked for Newsweek
Yes.
That was a translated version of the American edition of Newsweek. I moved to corporate Korea. I had several jobs in between, but I ended up, my last job was for a major Korean energy company. And I worked for, I think, almost 17 years for a Korean energy company. It was a totally new field for me, and I was very much challenged to acquire enough expertise to be good at my job. I actually retired last December.
Wow.
And so I was faced with the challenge
of
post-retirement.
And now you're back to the cultural area.
Yes.
Tell us about what you're doing now.
Well, always in my heart was this idea that I need to learn more about Korea. And so I kind of put that off because of family and job. But in 2019, I joined an organization that gives tours on the Seoul City Wall. And many people don't realize that there is actually a 600-year-old city wall in Seoul. But it's a fascinating place to go and learn about Korean history from the end of the Goryeo dynasty throughout Joseon, throughout modern contemporary history of Korea by walking along the wall. And you can't just say, I want to be a tour guide and it happens. You have to apply, and there's a great deal of competition. It's about 5-to-1 competition.
Wow.
And then you have to go through a year-long course of training, which I compared to that of an MA course in a university. You listen to months of lectures on Korean history, military history, how the wall was built, all of these things related, how it was repaired over the years. You end up giving tours on a particular section of the wall, and that section of the wall has its own unique history. So you have to learn about that. Then you have to go through a testing process before you are finally certified as a guide. And so I did this in 2019.
Yeah.
I nearly died doing it because it was so hard.
And because at that time you were still working full-time.
I was still working full-time and have a retirement where I can actually give back to Korea what Korea has given me for all those years. And so this organization, we do our tours as volunteer. And becoming a member of that provided a great social group plus intellectual stimulation.
True.
Because I was forced to learn many, many new things and also be tested on that knowledge. And that was not necessarily something that had happened recently in my life.
Yeah. But all this you're doing in Korean.
Yes,
We're
absolutely.
talking in English, but you're doing all this studying.
The program's only in Korean.
And
so.
you're giving the guides all in Korean.
Yes, absolutely. So that was also a big challenge. I had to write my entire script in Korean, have my mentor 선생님 check this, my mentor check this, and then I would practice it at home in front of my kids. And of course, they're fluent Korean speakers because they were born here and attended Korean schools and everything. I would be up there trying to pretend I was a tour guide. My kids would be giving me the no, Mom, do it again. We don't understand what you're saying, okay? And so I went through, I think, months and months of practice at home. And then, of course, even doing that, when you actually go and you're meeting the public, because we have people that sign up for the tours and they're all expecting this great tour, and I suddenly appear, the reaction is quite strange.
Are you the only non-Korean tour guide?
Yes.
That they've ever had?
Yes, the first and only at this particular point.
So you show up.
Yeah, I show up.
The group of Koreans are there expecting a guide to a Korean artifact, historical site, and you show up.
Yes.
What's their reaction?
Surprised. Very surprised. They are a little skeptical at first, but I do a lot of interaction with my audience because I think it's very important to develop this connection with them, is that I am really interested in Korean culture. I really love Korean culture. It's been such an eye-opening experience for me as an American because we don't really have this long history. We don't have city walls, we don't have royal tombs, we don't have palaces, that I am sincerely interested in learning more about this culture. And I hope that you respond to my tour guiding in that respect, that I am learning about your culture because I respect it and I respect you. And because we established this very, very friendly relationship from the beginning, and I say, I know I'm not going to be perfect, but I'm sincerely interested in this, that amazingly enough to me, the reaction of the general public has been incredibly supportive. And people say, oh, I didn't know this about my culture. I didn't understand this before. You've pointed out something that I haven't seen. Thank you so much for taking the time. And as a volunteer, that is the best thing in the world to hear. Because as a volunteer, you always take in more than you give. And through that experience, I feel prompted to study even more and branch out and be even better tour guiding in the future.
I mean, that must be incredibly rewarding. The way that you talk about it, I can see how people would be very impressed and engaged as you do it.
Yeah, I think learning history is key to understanding contemporary life. And the more I learn about the Joseon dynasty and even about previous Goryeo, these traditions haven't died, they haven't disappeared. These modes of behavior are still very much present in current Korean society. And that has been extremely illuminating for me. Because when I look at the way certain behavior patterns that were expected in history, I see those again even in today. And it makes my understanding of current Korea even better and hopefully deeper and more respectful than it was before.
You now explain Korean cultural heritage sites to Koreans, but also sometimes to non-Koreans too, right?
Yes, absolutely. Our organization is very receptive to outside requests. We have many famous global companies come to Korea for their meetings, and part of those meetings do include cultural experiences. So our organization will get requests, and we'll do tours on the weekdays for these organizations. And this has been a very interesting challenge because when you learn about a cultural heritage in Korean, it's not really productive to translate that word for word into English. Because your foreign visitors may have no idea about Korean history. It's unfortunate, but very often true. And so you have to find areas of direct communication with them. So when we do English language tours, we don't translate our scripts into Korean and just to English and go with those. what we do is totally revamp our approach. We want to make it easily accessible to foreigners. We try to find points of similarity between Western culture and Korean culture. And when you do that, listeners find understanding, for example, about the palaces much easier.
Yeah.
And so one example I can give you is that in most cases, when a prince becomes king in Korean, it's because the father has died. It's not every single case.
Yep.
And this, according to Confucian tradition, this is a very, very sad mourning period. So of course, there's no elegant, fancy coronation ceremony. In fact, there's no coronation ceremony because Korean kings don't put crowns on their heads. They receive the transfer of the royal stamp. So explaining something like that, saying you may have seen, in British history, the coronation of Charles III or something. In Korean, it's very, very different. And it's a very, very low-key ceremony.
Yeah.
So you take someone's basic understanding of something and then you relate it to what actually happens in Korea. And in fact, compared to the enthronement ceremonies for kings in Korea, the funeral ceremonies are much more elaborate. Again, a big cultural difference. And we have to explain what the Joseon dynasty was. When did it begin? When did it end? And then what kind of huge issues affected the palaces, for example, the Japanese invasions. So we have to add dates and context to what we do for foreign guests so that they understand much better what the role of the palace was and the role of king in Joseon dynasty was. So that in itself is a huge challenge.
Well, I mean, the fact that you understand that this is actually even a challenge is a testament of you having gone through a lot of this. And I guess it started with the whole Samulnori.
When we toured, we made our first tours, of course, very often for foreigners, this was the first time they had ever seen any Korean music. And so they heard it's percussion music, and it sounds very contemporary in a lot of ways. And so one of the first things people would ask, oh, is this contemporary music?
Even the drumming and even when they're all in Korean.
They think this sounds completely modern. It sounds jazz. And of course, traditional music has a lot of extraneous type of things where people are just adding or doing types of things musically that are not on any kind of musical score.
Which has sort of a jazz.
Absolutely. So we'd do shows and people would say, this looks more like jazz than traditional music. And so you have to talk to people about, well, what does tradition mean exactly? And of course, on the one hand, rhythms have been transmitted for generations, basically. But my teachers would also say, we listen to modern music at the same time. We listen to rock music or something like that. So of course this influences how we play also. And there's a great deal of freedom in what we do. We're not reading a musical score and trying to follow that. We're listening to each other.
The Samulnori, the performers
The performers.
Yeah.
So we're listening to each other. We're in a particular location that can inspire us. These all make the music very, very alive because you're never going to hear the same piece twice. It may have a title, but it's going to be different at every single performance. And then, of course, people want to know about the individual instruments. How are they played? How are they taught? This was also a major question, is there a school for this type of music? And up until maybe 15, 20 years ago, there wasn't. As I mentioned, you learned by being one of the children of the performers, or you went to live with the artist, and things weren't written down, and therefore you had to memorize it by speaking the music, basically. And so they're very interested in how the music is transmitted and what's going to happen to that in the future. Is anyone, writing it down and things like that? And then when we'd go and perform in Europe, especially, European musicians were very interested in collaborations. So for the first time, one of the most important things that Samulnori did was engage in collaborations with jazz pianists or saxophonists or bass guitarists. And that was quite a shock to the traditional music community here in Korea, because they said, we're traditional, what are you doing, playing with a saxophonist? And so bringing new ideas back to Korea was also part of the legacy of Samulnori, I think, too.
Opening eyes on both sides of the fence.
Absolutely, absolutely. Traditional music, many people think, oh, it only can be played one way. only by one instrument or by one performer, but that's not true. And I think also one of the most important things that Samulnori did is that it opened up so many career paths for young people. Originally, traditional Korean music wasn't considered a very secure career path, to put it frankly. And so by being successful, it attracted a lot of young people. Say, hey, we want to learn this too. We also can make a living doing that. And of course, with Korean parents, that's the #1 priority. We're glad you're interested in culture, but can you live
are you gonna be able to feed your family, basically?
Yes. Exactly.
Let's talk about one of the points that you brought up. The fact that the walls of Seoul is on the path to becoming a World Heritage Site, hopefully, cross our fingers. But there are many World Heritage Sites, not just in Seoul, but all around Korea. Are they being, visited and enjoyed by non-Koreans?
You're absolutely right. There are many UNESCO World Heritage Sites in Korea. And a really interesting fact is that currently there are 16 World Heritage Sites in Korea. And if you compare the Korean population to the number of World Heritage Sites, Korea ranks very, very high in the world in number of heritage sites compared to the population. So that's one particular thing that Koreans can be very, very proud of. These sites outside of Seoul need a lot more attention. And, in Seoul, you can go to Jongmyo or Changdeokgung Palace or the royal tombs that are within the boundaries of Seoul. But outside of Seoul, there's a wealth of places to visit. I would suggest that people think about going to places like the Confucian schools that were registered a few years ago. They're located throughout the countryside, but they're marvelous places to visit. And you can actually get a feel of what it was like to be a Confucian scholar during the Joseon dynasty. If you visit these places, you realize that Seoul is mostly Joseon dynasty, to be frank. But before that, there were all these separate kingdoms out in the southern areas. And they all had these amazingly distinct cultures. And if you visit the sites, you're really going to get a feel of how ancient a country Korea is. And that's a very interesting point because many people come into Korea and think, oh, it's very modern. It's only been the last 30 years that Korea has actually developed this way. But we're looking at thousands of years of history and thousands of years of complex, sophisticated history too. And that's one thing in the future, if I'm able to, I would absolutely really like to promote is visiting places outside of Seoul.
So we're talking about your future now.
Yes.
Suzanna, do you see, give us a little bit more hint about what role you would like to play?
Well, fortunately, if you become a UNESCO World Heritage Site, it means that all your application process was done in English. So we do have a lot of information about these sites, very well-written documents in English. And very often, UNESCO asks that a small museum be built at the sites too, so people can better understand the context of this history. So there are resources there. What we need to do is find ways to connect people to actually getting there.
I see.
So transportation.
Physically getting people
getting there.
From the airport or wherever the hotel is to the site.
To the site. Also, I would love to be able to train local guides. One thing that might be possible is we have a lot of what the multicultural families living outside of Seoul, especially women. And it would be great if we could train these women to give tours in their native languages. Give an opportunity to these young women to learn more about their local neighborhoods and heritage, but also have them give tours in their languages to any visitors that might come down there. That's one program I'd love to do.
Knowing you, I'm thinking that it's going to happen one way or another. And when that happens, you have to come back and talk to us again.
I hope I could bring lots of guides with me.
Yes, that'd be great. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Suzanna.
Oh, it was so great to see you. Thank you so much.
And that's it for me. I'll be back next week with another globalist who's putting Korea on the map. Sunji out.